I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Thomas Daffern, who is a philosopher, historian, peace studies expert, poet, and religious studies specialist. He holds a PhD from the University of London for a thesis which explores the history of the search for peace and which proposes a new field of transpersonal history. More recently, he has developed a periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions as a teaching aid for use in schools and universities. As peace officer of the Council of British Druid Orders, he practices an eco-centered spirituality, affirming the wisdom of primal peoples of all cultures, epochs, and geographical regions. Dr. Daffern is a prolific author and notable activist who has initiated many international schemes. He is currently serving as educational coordinator for the Delphic Games. Over to you, Thomas.
Right. Well, thank you for your introduction very much. And welcome to everybody that's here. Nice to see you all. My talk is divided into 5 sections. Each one is timed to last about 12 minutes. So I've got an hour in total. I'm not going to share a PowerPoint. I decided not to. I'm going to instead ask to borrow your imaginations. And since you're artists, I'm sure that, and interested in art and spirituality, visualization and imagination is, something we can take for granted here. Okay, so my first section is I want to introduce you to the whole idea of the history of Delphi, why it's important, what it was, and how long it lasted. So basically, it was an oracle center, and it was one of many in the ancient world, the classical world. I've been to a few of these. Dodona was sacred to Zeus up in the north of Greece and was a grove of oak trees. They foretold, they got a divine message, we'd now call it a download, from Zeus in response to a question by the way the oak leaves rustled. There was another oracle to Zeus in frontiers of Egypt and Libya, Zeus Ammon, where Alexander the Great went. That was a very important oracle because they decided Zeus and Ammon were the same god, Amun of Thebes and Zeus. There was another one at Claros, which is in Asia Minor near Samos. Another one at Didyma, which I've been to, sacred to Apollo again, near Miletus. Incredible. These were all amazing. Now, what happened to them? Why did we shut these oracles down? What's wrong with having oracles? That's the question I want to pose to you guys. And that affects the spiritual bit of this talk, because to me, an oracle is someone that's transparent to spirit. And it's a special training. In the Druid community, we call that person an ovate. An ovate was a particular form of Druid in the Celtic world that trained to be able to receive divine downloads. In the Semitic world, Nabis were around. We have ancient texts in cuneiform from Mari and other places. And of course, they then get into the biblical tradition. And, prophets are very, very important in the biblical tradition, but they predate that. And there's something universal. You have them in the Shinto tradition, in the shamanic traditions of Korea, in the other religious traditions of humanity. And then we have, of course, Jesus. The Christian traditions say Jesus was, a super prophet, like in a different league, he's a super prophet. But then Muslims say, well, no, actually he wasn't. He was just another prophet, and Muhammad's the super prophet. So actually what we have are what I call prophetic wars going on the planet. I got interested in all this as a peace scholar. You know, in the Middle East, I mean, Biden's going there to try and sort it out. I mean, good luck. We have prophetic wars going on, like my prophet is better than yours. I mean, how puerile is that, with all due respect? I would much rather we reopen some of these ancient prophetic sanctuaries that were all over the place, trained people to actually be able to contact spirit, not from a book, not from somebody that channeled it 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, but from now. And, you know, there is a move to do this. There's a lot of people training as shamans and druids and so on nowadays. And that's really what we're talking about here. So to me, the reopening of the Delphic Oracle has to be part of this overall package of the Delphic Games revival, because the Delphic Oracle is really, really ancient. We know that the Minoans were there in about 1600 BC. Now that's nearly 5,000 years ago, right? The legend is that some Minoan sailors were directed there by some dolphins when they lost their way, and the dolphin is sacred to Apollo. He led them to this sanctuary, and it became an oracular center. The legend of its founding is that, you may know this, that there was a terrible serpent, dragon, python, huge snake terrorizing the people of that area, threatening to destroy the world, breathing fire, sort of, you know, quite a force of evil, the Typhon was. And Apollo, who was the kind of archer of the gods and the backup security guard for Mount Olympus, managed with some difficulty to defeat the Typhon. It was a heroic, epic battle. And to me, that symbolizes the destruction of destructivity. I mean, Apollo becomes the god of reason, philosophy, healing, and prophecy, and music. And and so because he's the god of prophecy, it was under his tutelage, Delphi. Interestingly, it also was shared with Dionysus. And Dionysus has a toehold in Delphi. He came, and 3 months of the year, he was in charge of Delphi. And it was said that Apollo went north. Now, there's a legend in the classics that Apollo was in the Hyperborean region for those 3 months of the year. Now, that has been interpreted by some scholars as being in Britain. And it's interesting that the Druids of Stonehenge, Avebury, and so on, it was said that their temples were dedicated to Apollo when the classicist scholars went and visited, you know, and did their tour. And I think, well, I proved in an Encyclopedia of Druid Studies that there's a very strong link between Apollo and the Druid cultures of Gaul and Britannia and Ireland. And of course, they were all, I mean, you know, into prophetic intelligence, what I call prophetic intelligence. So anyway, it lasted for thousands of years, this Oracle Center. It was doing two things. It was giving responses to like heads of government. Nowadays, Macron or Johnson, you know, should I resign? Should I call a general election? Big matters of state. But it was also doing things like, you know, should I marry that girl I just met and fancy? Or should I divorce my husband and go off with my lover? You know, personal stuff, right? It was catering to everyone. And the history of Delphi is, you know, is known. Let me just read a very short passage from, to give you an idea. There were monuments dedicated by the states of Greece because it was the one place where all the separate city-states came together. It was like a peace factory. And there was 20 treasuries where they gave donations from their state. They were very proud to do that. There was a theater there. There was a temple to Apollo, to which the sacred way wound up from the road below. The original temple, which was a primitive small building, was destroyed by fire in 548. But objects of value saved from it have been found buried under a stone of the sacred way. There was a second temple built in 510. An Athenian family helped fund all that. And this temple tragically was then destroyed in 373, and a new one was built. often with help from all over Greece. Athens was a great sponsor of Delphi, but so were all the other states. This building survived until Roman times, was repaired by Domitian. And the Holy of Holies, Adyton, where the priestesses gave their oracles, was below the southwest corner of the temple. A stone here known as the Omphalos, the reputed center of the earth, was found here. It bore the inscription Gaia, or Guy, the stone of the earth. And she was still honored as the original, presence at the oracle. And a marble omphalos of Roman period has also been found later, which is in the museum in Delphi, which I visited. And it was finally closed after Christianization in about 390 by order and by military force under the emperor Theodosius, who shut the oracle down because it was a reaction against all things pagan, which to me was a tragedy, actually. Okay, that's all happening. One of the most important things the Delphic oracle did was it ordered the creation of the Olympic Games. In 776 BC, it was an oracle of Delphi that said, "Go forth and found the Olympic Games." Right? And we all honor the Olympic Games, but actually Delphi was older. It was the source of the Olympic Games, right? And we know that there were Delphic Games from very early on going on. Delphi's famous for its saying, of course, "Know thyself, nothing in excess," and it was a haven for philosophers. The Greeks were kind of, inventing or developing philosophy at this time. We know that Orpheus, a mythical, semi-mythical figure, but if you read Edward Chouret's wonderful French study, The Great Initiates, Chouret has Orpheus partly training in Delphi, and I think that's very possible. And later, a couple of generations later, Pythagoras comes to Delphi. There's some sources say that Pythagoras' mother was even one of the priestesses at Delphi. And Chouret, if you don't know that book, The Great Initiates, it's really an important book to read. It was 19th century French occultist, esotericist. We know the Pythian games were set up long back in like 1500 BC, but they were reformed in 590 BC. The Delphic games also are called the Pythian games in honor of the python that was slain. But Pythos has double meaning. It's in the name Pythagoras. It also means the depths, going to the depths of things. And the games were instituted. They took place every 4 years in parallel to the Olympic Games. So 2 years after the Olympic Games, you had a Delphic Games. They were as important for over 1,000 years in the classical world. What was different about them was that they focused on the arts and on the intellectual arts. Olympus was for the athletes to parade their physical skill, running, jumping high, all that stuff. The Delphic Games are for drama, theatre performances, recitations in verse, so poetry, also prose recitations. So, people like Herodotus would go and read their excerpts from their histories. Also singing, both in choirs and individual performances. Music was incredibly important to the Greeks, and performances, both single performances and in groups. And all this was, really a matter of prestige to get to perform in the Delphic Games and win. What did you get? No money prizes. You got a crown of laurel or bay leaves. You just got the kudos of winning Delphi that. And then there wouldn't be another contest for another 4 years, Importantly, it was a peace project. You couldn't compete in the Delphic Games if your state was attacking another state. There had to be a truce during the Delphic Games. And it was, like rigorously enforced. This is an acceptance that the arts are sacred. It's one of the many reasons I think we should bring them back. Okay, I'm going to move on to my second section. what questions have we got about these games? Because, I'm a scholar, like probably many of you on here. And when I first heard of all this, I got very excited. I thought, well, who's written the history of all this? Who's done the whole history of the Delphic Games? Why has it been neglected? Why didn't nobody tell me about this when I was studying, philosophy and classics? We don't have a list of winners. As far as I can tell, the Olympic Games has a list of winners were lasting about 1,000 years. We know who won in each category in each of the four, each year. They took place every 4 years. We don't seem to have that for the Delphic Games. Why not? I want to find it. Maybe it's in some lost Greek archive in a cave somewhere in northern Greece. Please, if you hear of it, let me know, right? One thing we do know, which is really interesting, is that Aristotle went to Delphi because, and this is a tragedy, right? The archive burned down. Like all the records, all the winners, the whole history of who'd competed and all that for 1,000 years went up in smoke. And they didn't know what to do. So they called in Aristotle to come and try and sift through the rubble and see if he could reconstruct or salvage anything. Now, I'd love that scene. It'd make a great little play, wouldn't it? Aristotle trying to, work out what had happened. Well, what happened to that research? That is factual. We know he went. Did he ever publish it? Do we have that still? I can't find it in any of his collected works. There's no kind of like, Aristotle's report on the Delphic Games. My colleague Sarabji, who set up the Aristotle Project at King's College, they might know. Again, it could be lost in some remote Bavarian monastery, the lost text of Aristotle on the Delphic Games. Let's find it, please. We know some of the poets that went. We know Pindar went regularly because he wrote some of his greatest poetry and presented it there. He was competing, and he's one of the great sort of epic early poets. What about dramatists? Was Aeschylus there? Was Sophocles? Very probably. But we don't know for absolute sure. Nobody's done this research. This needs to be done, folks, right? Which prose writers? I'm pretty sure Herodotus went because any chance he got, he'd read out some of his histories. He was doing it in Athens. I'm sure, because Athens and Delphi were quite close. They knew each other. The Athenians were sponsoring the Delphi temples. Of course he would have gone. He probably won, What about Plato? Would he have gone? Probably, almost certainly. I mean, what a great thought, Plato winning the contest that year. You may know that Plato originally wanted to be a dramatist. He didn't really start out saying, I'm going to be a philosopher. He wanted to be a playwright. That was the done thing in his circles in Athens. And then he found Socrates, fell in love with philosophy. But he did a wonderful thing. He decided to present philosophy as theatre, which is the dialogues. Were they ever performed? Were these dialogues performed at Delphi? It's possible. I mean, if we get the Delphic Games up and running fully, then I'd love to see a Platonic dialogue each every 4 years as part of the performance. Which musicians went? We don't know. Which dancers? Dance was a high art form in Greece. Of course, they were doing their thing. But there were also painters, artists, and sculptors performing. So it was a whole, we now call it a multimedia type of show. One thing we do know is that Plutarch, a little later, he lived 49 to 122 AD. Plutarch was the director of the Delphic Games during the last 30 years of his life. He's one of the most intellectually, profound of the Neoplatonic scholars of the Roman times. And he was a very interesting man, actually. I've just finished a biography of Plutarch. He was Greek. He was from just near Delphi, but he knew that he was now part of this thing called the Roman Empire, and he wasn't anti-Roman. He made an effort to go to Italy, and he mixed and mingled with the Roman aristocratic intellectuals. He met people who'd known Cicero. He met the sort of leading intellectuals of Rome. And that's why he produced his marvelous book, Parallel Lives, which tells the life stories of great Romans and great Greeks, saying, look, we're similar here. He was interested in the occult, what we would call the occult or esoteric stuff. He was a priest of the gods at Delphi. And he wrote a study of Isis and Osiris, which is really important for the mysteries, because we know that the mysteries, in a sense, are parallel to the Delphic Games. I think, in the social circle of ancient Greece, you didn't go to Ascot and all that stuff. You went to the mysteries at Eleusis, and then you went to the Delphic Games. And that was what and Plutarch wrote about the mysteries. He was deeply interested in esoteric stuff. In his Life of Numa Pompilius, which is a masterpiece, if you've not read it, in Plutarch's Lives, Numa Pompilius founded the Roman religion and did so with the occult tuition of a muse called Egeria, who was an Italian goddess, actually, who he'd go and meet at night in a wooded grove. And when he died, he was buried with all the mystic books that Egeria had given to him. And that his mission was to make the Romans religious so they'd stop being so warlike. Before that, they were just warmongers. He was the second king of Rome and the best ever king. And Plutarch obviously loved him. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff, and Plutarch's best friend was the priestess in charge of Delphi. We have some of the letters they exchanged. Around that time, Hadrian appears, who was the emperor of the whole caboodle, who was very interested in the Delphic Games. He did a kind of revival of them. He was traveling about. He came to Britain in 122 AD. He went to Spain, Asia, Greece. But unfortunately, he just missed Plutarch. Whether they ever met, I'm not sure. Plutarch died in 122. Hadrian, didn't get to Greece till 128, so they probably didn't meet. But certainly Hadrian knew all about Plutarch, and he was very, very in favor of the Delphic Games. And he went to Egypt, and he was a man of great culture. So there's many questions to ask. I found one PhD on the Delphic Games written by some obscure classical scholar at Harvard. One, right, in English anyway. But I'm still working on these questions, and you can certainly help me because there's a lot of mysteries here. Right, I want to move on to the third point of my talk here. So what's been happening recently? I mean, they were shut down. Why don't we just let them be closed and get on with our lives and all be good Christians or whatever we want to be, or we can go for our own particular revealed prophetic book. Why bring back trouble? Okay, so as you know, the Olympic Games were revived in the 19th century, in the 1890s, by Pierre de Coubertin, who was a great sort of French internationalist, European aristocrat who trained in kind of French views on sport being a route to health. The Olympic Games first were retrialed at a place called Much Wenlock in England by an enterprising vicar who set up the Much Wenlock Games. But Pierre de Coubertin did it big time, and he thought let's go for it and let's have the Olympic Games back. We've got to remember that time was quite a Hellenophile type of culture going on. The Greek War of Independence in the 1830s had fired the imagination of Europe. Byron went, and a lot of romantic poets wanted to bring back Greece. It was a sort of romantic thing. I did part of my degree at King's College, chair of modern Greek studies. It's fascinating, that period. I've been to the museum in Athens where they've kept Byron's study as it was when he died. And it was the time of Schliemann who rediscovered Mycenae and Troy. And Schliemann was very close friends with the Prime Minister Gladstone at the time, who was a member of the Athenaeum. And I just wish they'd refounded the Delphic Games then in the 1890s. Gladstone would have had the clout to do it. Schliemann would have had the star appeal. They could have done it. I think history took a wrong turning. We started the Olympic Games instead of the Delphic Games. And all we've had since then is like people pretending to be macho and hyper strong instead of sensitive and artistic. So I think, anyway, there is good news here, because in the 1990s, exactly 100 years later, a learned man in Germany called Christian Kirsch refounded the Delphic Games. He called a gathering of artists and sort of patrons of the arts. He's himself not really a practicing artist, he's a patron of the arts. He said, look, we ought to be refounding the Delphic Games. He had studied fine arts in Munich and had an apprenticeship that taught him, goldsmithing, all the kind of Dürer stuff of German attention to detail. And it fired Kirsch's imagination to revive the Delphic Games. And he set up the International Delphic Council, which still goes, for which I'm their education coordinator now. Our current Secretary General is Indian, and that's an office that is sort of elected. It moves around. It's an international grouping, and there have been a number of international games have taken place. Kirsch refounded it in '94. They've had games in Russia, in the Philippines, in Korea, in South Africa, and in Delphi itself. One of the interesting things about the Delphic Games is it takes water as its symbolic emblem. The Olympic Games takes fire, and the Olympic torch is carried around. Everyone cheers, and that's very exciting. The Delphic Games takes water from the Castalian spring in Delphi, and that is taken to the place where the Delphic Games are going to be performed and then poured out in a sort of libation. So it's using the image of water to counterbalance the fiery Olympics. And it has an important rethinking, because we don't want to just repeat the old stuff. And the Delphic Games have come up with new categories for the games, because art is always on the move, right? Now we have 6 categories of arts, which form the modern Delphic Games. And I'm going to share with you what they are. The first is language arts and rhetoric. This would be written literature, poetry, children's literature, storytelling, but also things like calligraphy, book design, publishing awards. You could have within that language arts all kinds of stuff. I want to include ancient language script decipherments. Whoever first deciphers Etruscan or the Indus Valley script, well, they deserve the Delphic Award, in my opinion. I mean, that's major stuff, right? The second field is musical arts and sounds, which is singing, vocal music, instrument design even, making new instruments, performance, traditional music, classical, but also contemporary, world music, and revived ancient music. We know some of what the Greek music was sounding like. It's very similar to Middle Eastern music, Kurdish, say, or Armenian. Tremendous potential there. As a peace thing, imagine the greatest musicians of the world competing to come to Delphi, and there'd be sort of national heats to decide which of the 3 greatest musicians of Armenia would go, this year. Then there's the performing arts, which includes dance, solo and group dance, classical dance, ballet, but also folk dances, and theatre arts, which is something I'm passionately interested in, having written a couple of plays. I was an actor as a kid, like Plato, I wanted to be a dramatist. But also things like puppet plays, shadow plays, indigenous plays, community plays, street theatre, activist theatre. We need to expand the horizons of people so that you come to Delphi, it'd be like amazing, I don't know, a 10-day or 2-week kind of incredible feast of the contemporary arts. Then we have this thing called social arts and communications. Now this is going to excite Leela. This is transformative rituals and ceremonies. So you could come and do an art performance as ritual, right? It would include educational games, media, journalism, and television awards, academic arts, knowledge as performance, education arts, didactics and pedagogy, and intellectual arts, philosophy and so on. There'd be sort of debates competing, discuss the nature of virtue, and then, different countries would compete. but also scientific communication discoveries, medical and healing arts. These are the social arts and communications that we all rely on. Educational computer games. I've proposed we have a Delphic games as a computer game as well, to run parallel with the actual games revival. You know, get kids and grown-ups who've never grown up, let's all play the Delphic games, you know. And you could have, I mean, why do they have to have Steve Bannon's World of Warcraft? I mean, look at the consequences of that. Let's have Delphic peace games, and we can move the conversation on this planet to a more mature kind of dialogue. And this section includes peace arts, awards for, say, politicians, political leaders who've steered the world towards peace, and economic arts, people who've done, you know, their thing for society. The founder of this, Christian Kirsch, is a great fan of the kind of German economic miracle as investing in social wealth. True wealth comes from our interconnectedness in society, not our competitiveness. And the same should be true in the arts. Then we have a section, the fourth is the visual arts and handicrafts. Sorry, this is the fifth one, which is sculpture, design, fashion, painting, calligraphy, graphic design, photography, film, but also graffiti, and handicrafts. Our Indian Secretary General is very, you know, big on Indian handicrafts. I mean, India is a place of great artistic genius, and they would want to come and win it each time, you know. But also digital arts, website design, pottery, ceramics, animation, and posters. I mean, visual arts is a huge category in its own right. And finally, we come to the sixth, which is a new one that, you know, elements of all those previous ones were in the Delphic Games. Now we got a new one because of the state of the world. This is our unique potential contribution, which is called the ecological arts and architecture. Now, the theme of water is very important. We have global warming going on. Delphi is really hot most summers, and there are fires going on in the mountains around it. You know, this is an emergency. The Delphic Games is like signaling, hey guys, the planet's going down here. We have to bring the great thinkers, the great artists, the great poets, musicians of the planet together. Honor the gods, I don't care what name you want to use, you know, who can help put out these flames, right? And this would be things like permaculture design, forest gardens, landscape design, city and village planning that's ecological and you know, sane, preservations of cultural heritage landscape, but also even things like new energy ideas. You know, we can't go on using fossil fuels. We need someone to plug into gravitational waves or find some new energy field. So we give awards to these guys in the ecological arts. And it would be things like peace gardens, therapeutic gardens. And I'm involved with a project called the Hippocratic Gardens Initiative. We're hoping to get some money from the European Union, a chap in Greece. We're looking at the Hippocratic medical tradition, which is all about medicinal plants. So we're trying to grow these Hippocratic gardens around the place. And you know, that sort of thing might merit a prize. Eco-sustainability projects, tree arts. A lot of people go and make art in nature, eco art. You know, they go and do sculptures of old fallen bits of wood and stuff. Well, that's all in this category. Also the water arts, so rivers, lakes and seas. What's happening with either purification, like Kennedy Jr. helped clean up the Hudson. I think he deserves a prize. But those kinds of things, wilderness preservation and so on, and ecotourism. So that category number 6 is very, you know, if we're going to make it as a planet, I think Gaia and Apollo can collaborate on this one. I think they would really like us to bring that back. So now I want to move on to my next little bit of this talk, and just share a little bit about my own role. Why am I here? Why did I get this job as education coordinator? So I started, I first heard of the Delphic Games in the 1990s, right? I was active in London, setting up an Institute of Peace Studies at the university. I was doing research for my PhD. I was doing a million things before breakfast, in one's youth. And I had a very interesting friend called Dr. Carl Shapley, who was he was the son of one of America's greatest astronomers, Harlow Shapley, who was Harvard professor of astronomy, and who discovered the galactic shape of the universe, old Harlow Shapley. And he was the guy that put the S into UNESCO, because originally it was going to be UNESCO, and he said, no, we better add the science in. He was a friend of Roosevelt, and a friend of Einstein. And Carl Shapley used to tell me stories of Einstein coming round to their house playing the violin and stuff, because he was a musician as well. Anyway, Carl went to the launch meeting of the Delphic Games, came back from it very excited in the early 90s, and said to me, Thomas, this is fantastic. We're going to save the world through the arts, et cetera, et cetera. But I was so busy doing a million things. I let him do that. Do you know what I mean? I thought, well, that's his project. And I didn't have time to follow it all up. But I heard, I thought this is great. So it was always on my to-do list. Okay. And I'd studied philosophy and Greek history and classics and so on. I'd read philosophy at university, but I was chased out by anti-philosophers. There was a tradition in the British philosophy profession at that time that philosophy isn't allowed. It was called logical positivism. Anyone interested in metaphysics or spirituality or esotericism is just stupid, And Wittgenstein was about as daring as they'd go. So I'm afraid I walked out in disgust as a young student with a pack on my back and walked to Stonehenge. It was my little protest movement. This was the 70s, right, when we did that kind of thing. And I said, oh, damn it, I'm going to go and live philosophy, right? And I did. I went to Canada. I studied at the University of Calgary. I read anthropology, and I put my own world map of intellectual history together. It's the first time I'd ever read the great classics, the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, the Buddhist sutras. I did a world philosophy, deep immersion in Canada, came back to Britain and launched Philosophers to Peace with my friend John Francis Phipps, and then was working at the University of London to set up this center, coordinating Philosophers to Peace worldwide. In 1990, I was at a conference in Moscow and was elected coordinator of Philosophers to Peace. We thought in 1990 that peace was just around the corner. We'd ended the Cold War, Berlin Wall had come down. We thought it was just sort of applied reason would bring peace. I underestimated the pathological Sophia-phobic tendencies of human beings. Sophia-phobia is the opposite of philosophy. It's the fear of wisdom. It's a word I've coined. I've written a book called Sophia-phobia. It's a medical condition that I think at least 9/10 of the planet suffer from. They're terrified of wisdom because it brings too much knowledge, brings too much responsibility. You have to do something. So in most societies, if you offer wisdom, they say, God, go away or I'll shoot you, right? And it's always been that way, by the way. It's nothing new here. But so coordinating Philosophers of Peace, I think I was over optimistic. I thought we would get our Peace Studies Centre in London. We'd have a learned, like a Royal Academy for Philosophers of Peace and so on. But what I discovered is that the British educational system is rather in hock to the military industrial complex, and that the veneer of academic respectability hides a kind of investment in long-term destructivist agendas. And but I didn't give up hope. I still carried on with my studies. I was deeply immersed in the Pythagorean Platonic Orphic traditions, and as a poet, I was still actively writing. In 1982, I went to Delphi for the first time, and I can only call it a kind of mystic experience. It was my interrail trip, and I fell in love with the landscape. If you've been to Delphi, it's just mind-blowing, isn't it? And I looked at the museum, I did all the, went to all the temples. And then I thought I'll just pop up the mountain, Mount Parnassus. I'll just go up a little bit and meditate, It was a perfectly blue, sunny day. It was summer, May. I got halfway up the mountain and suddenly there was this enormous storm came out of nowhere. terrifying thunder rolling around the entire landscape. And it started absolutely drenching down. And I took that as a sign from the gods I probably shouldn't be on the mountain, and that it was time to go back down. So it was a bit sobering, this experience. But I went on to Eleusis and slept out, went down to the initiation centers. It's all in ruins now. Sadly, it's another thing I think should be revived, is the Eleusis Mystery Center. Meanwhile, I was studying Druidry in great detail. I lived in Wales for 10 years in Scotland, and I was working with various Druid orders. I got involved as the Bard of Britain for peace. I was given the Peace Druid sword at Avebury. I set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Stonehenge. What I discovered was that there are indigenous cultures of spirituality everywhere. We don't have to go to Australia and study Aboriginal culture to find indigenous cultures. We have them in Europe. We have them in the Celtic world. I went to Ireland and met Irish Druids. I went to Wales and Scotland, and I discovered the Druids and the Celtic cultures hold a lot of the secrets of Britain. Sort of the Arthurian legend and all that, but actually underneath that is Finn McCool and the ancient Druids of Ireland. I read about the Herodotus of Ireland, as he's called, Geoffrey Keating. I'd never heard of him. We're never taught Irish history in the British school system. I immersed myself in ancient Irish legends and mythology and discovered our indigenous shamanic tradition. You couldn't be a Druid unless you were also a poet and a bard. You could specialize in that and just be a bard, or you could go on and study the higher grades. The Druids had to study also prophetic skills. And then they had, the word Druid means a truth seer. The word Dru is from Dharma. It's the same root as Sanskrit, Dharma, ultimate truth. Vid is to see or know, as in idea or vision or videre. So anyway, I fell in love with all this stuff, met the people involved, and eventually wrote a 3-volume encyclopedia of Druid studies. It's the first and only one of its kind, because this is the ugly duckling of religious studies. Okay, very few people do PhDs on Druidry. There's no single academic center. There's no master's degree. It's kind of, you're on your own here, folks. And English heritage and the establishment archaeologists have this inbuilt desire to dumb it all down and say, no, there weren't any Druids. Now that's to do with the Anglo-Saxon suppression of Celtic spirituality, which is a fact, and talk to a proper trained Irish scholar about this and they will know what I'm talking about. Talk to a proper Welsh or a Scottish scholar, they'll know the same. So anyway, got immersed in all that. And so eventually, long story, I moved to France when Brexit happened, because I'm utterly an internationalist, a peace activist against this Anglo-Saxon, we rule the world, post-imperial fantasy land, Brexit. And finally wrote the letter to the guys running the Delphic Games, 20 years late, but better late than never, eh? Wrote to Christian, who I had on the same brochure that Carl Shapley had given me all those years before, right? Wrote to him and said, hi, what's happening? Is it still going? And we got corresponding, we became friends, we've chatted for ages, and yes, it's still going. And he sent me all the bump and he said, well, look, I think you ought to be our education coordinator, because you see, this is the untapped potential of the Delphic Games, in my opinion. My vision is I want the Delphic Games to be known about in every school worldwide, in every country. Every school kid should be excited about this, especially if they're into the arts in some form, right? Every art department, they should have on their wall, like how to find out about the Delphic Games, like a poster, right? But I also want, and if a school is providing proper arts education and cultural education, then it we would give it a signature, sort of a mandate to put on its wall, the headmaster's office. Like, this is a Delphic Games approved school. But to win that, you'd have to provide dance, theatre, poetry, film, photography, music, not as a sort of add-on for rich kids, but like basic for their educational upliftment. So only schools that provide proper arts education as mainstream subjects will qualify as a Delphic school. And what about universities? Okay, I've taught at both schools and universities for years. And, you know, I love universities. I've taught at Oxford, I've taught at London, there's some great universities, but there's some awfully terrible universities which have redesigned themselves as sort of business schools. They churn out bits of paper and they pretend to be universities, qualifying you to go and, I don't know, go and, you know, cause trouble with economists around the world. They're not, to me, these aren't real universities in the Delphic tradition. So to qualify as a Delphic university, you would have to have an arts department. You'd have to have a functioning poetics, you know, program. You'd have to have all the arts available. You'd have to have a classics department, a philosophy department. See, a lot of these departments are being shut down. They've just shut down the literature department at Sheffield University, for God's sake. I mean, these are not universities. It's like Darth Vader's team have landed on planet Earth and are trying to take over academia and dumb us all into thinking that the robotoid route is the way to go. Well, no, the Delphic tradition says it's becoming truly human. Know thyself. You know, this is the Delphic code. So we have a code. We'd ask the universities to subscribe to it and see their mission in education as properly instructing young minds. This is a precious thing. This is the next millennium, you know, if we can pull this off. And so, you know, they learn about the Olympic Games in the sports departments. I mean, and great, I'm not, you know, saying anything against the Olympics. I'm saying, yeah, but there's so much more we should be offering our children. They can't all be great athletes, but some might be the next great poets or painters or theatre performers. You know, we need them to be able to emulate and follow the models at these things. So anyway, that's my mission, is to kind of get the universities signed up and the schools. The next thing is, okay, but what about the professional artists and like professional ballet companies? What about the Royal Academy of Arts? What about the great symphony orchestras? I want them to know about the Delphic Games. I want them to tell their people that there's this thing and we're doing it, and it's really, really important. You know, many of the great musicians, I'm a great fan of Mozart. I mean, he was a initiate, he was a Freemason, I'm reading a book in French at the moment about the links between the arts and the Freemasonic lodges in 18th century Europe. I mean, many of the great artists were initiates of some form or another, such as Mozart. And they saw art as a spiritual work, right? And so that's why I'm saying, let's get the great art professionals of the planet to know about the Delphic Games, get them involved. And I think it's, you know, the other thing that's most important is the sacred truce. The Olympic Games has a truce thing. I don't know, it doesn't seem to be observed, but we would certainly in the Delphic Games insist that it is. And so where are we at now with this? Okay, I'm in touch with President Macron in France, because Macron is quite a cultured chap. He set up the Paris Peace Forum, partly at my suggestion, I have to say, a few years ago when I moved to France. He's hosting the Olympic Games in 2024. Some of you, I'm sure you know that, right? What I'm trying to get Macron to do is on the back of the Olympic Games in Paris, to launch 2 years later the Paris Delphic Games, using the same infrastructure, the same people in place, because nowadays the Olympic Games always have a big cultural thing. They have a cultural Olympics running parallel. They get singers, dancers, sort of a mini Delphic Games thing. And so all those people are being already put into place by Macron's team. What I'm saying to Macron is, look, you've got the team, you've got the infrastructure. Let's just run the Delphic Games in 2026, because I think France could pull it off. They love culture, they love the arts. Paris should be 2026 Delphic Games. And what better time in terms of geopolitics than doing that? Because we have the Ukraine war, we have Russia, a European Slavic nation, attacking to the death for pathological reasons another Slavic European nation, and they seem to be going systematically through and destroying all their cities that they can, smashing theaters, bombing schools. I mean, to me, they bombed the museum of Chekhov, who used to live in the Ukraine. They've bombed the house of the great Ukrainian philosopher Skorovoda, who, they're just acting as complete anti-intellectuals. Let's just put it like that, in a gentle, kind little way. So I would love to see Ukraine, Russia, France, Britain say, okay, we're gonna pause the Ukraine war. We're gonna do the Delphic games instead. I can see Macron selling it, even to Putin, because he has, Russians like to think of themselves as cultured people. And most Russian intellectuals and academics I know are very cultured people. They'd be shocked at what's going on. So let's kind of work on this. Right. Okay. Now I'm coming to the end of my little talk. I'm going to finish, as I promised, with a poem, because I'm also an artist. You see, standing before you, I'm not just a philosopher. I'm also a poet, and I've chosen a couple of my poems. If when I die you put on my gravestone poet, that's fine. I mean, that sums everything up to me, right? Okay, I'm reading two poems from my collected works. I've published 7 volumes. I've written over 1,000 poems. I think I qualify as a poet. I've taken part in the Struga Poetry Festival in Macedonia, which is one of the most important international poetry readings. I'll share that in a minute. I think I wrote this poem back in the 98. It's called Notes Towards Making a Dictionary of All the Sacred Languages. In all this walking amidst the words, we have yet to get out into the boat beyond being and push off into the vast ocean. From the 22 sacred letters, you can always arrange the trisyllabic roots into 10,648 combinations. From these, you can work out all the possible aggregations of sound, energy, and meaning. But what then? Still, you can't hymn the one song that will catch the undying beauty as it actually is. Like a great whale, the beauty eludes us, drawing us on from sunset to sunset amid strange waters. There's only one thing for it. You'll have to dive down into the waters, surrender and drown. Let your vehicle sink. Adopt the strategy of relinquishing strategies. Let the waters unite above and below you, and learn to swim like a fish amidst these vowels and consonants, swaying to the rhythms of her inner being, that goddess of oceans. Then you might find yourself being breathed in and out like a shoal of plankton, a shower of dreams dreamed by others beyond the veil, where the ineffable alone keeps the final count and the reckoning. Let yourself be weighed by this sea of love, and you'll find yourself buoyant, afloat on all the hopes and visions of the former prophets and true saints who vanished within the mirror and became the eye itself, seeing her, who became hawks and flew off sunwards, smiling and weeping at once, and became the rainbow. And your tears and theirs flow from that same inner saltwater sea of compassion. Thus, we are all like fishermen of wisdom, hauling pearls fit for the palace of the queen. So that's my first poem I want to read. Notes towards making a sacred dictionary of languages. I just want to say as a footnote to that, the Delphic Council also has an International Delphic Academy, which is run by a wonderful Polish academician based in Berlin and Vienna and wherever's needed. At the moment, he's very busy because he's working on Ukrainian art exhibitions, and they're trying to salvage, like peace out of the chaos of this Ukrainian war. But he's a close friend of mine, and we're publishing as a project of the Delphic Academy a dictionary that I produced, which was an appendix to my doctoral thesis on philosophical terminology in all different languages. So it includes Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, Irish, Gaelic, Hebrew, Arabic, etc., Chinese, Tibetan. It's the first and only time any philosopher has ever bothered to put together a polyglot, multilingual dictionary of philosophy. I don't know why, but I took seriously Wittgenstein's influence, like the limits of my language are the limits of my world. I was taught at Bristol philosophy department. Okay, so this is my response. Right, that's the first poem I want to share, and the last one is written inspired by my trip to Macedonia. When I was invited, I didn't know this thing existed. I had an invite out of the blue to come to this wonderful thing called the Struga Poetry Festival, which is still going. People like Pablo Neruda and Ted Hughes, really famous poets, have won. I'm just a nobody, so I just went along and held a spear, right? But I did write some poems, and I was very inspired because it's at Ohrid. If you know Lake Ohrid in the south of Macedonia, it is amazing country, and Lake Ohrid has got Greece, Albania, Macedonia all on its borders, and it was just mind-blowingly beautiful. I think poetry should always be celebrated in places of beauty, which is why I want to see the Delphic Games revived, so we can go and read our poems there. But this Struga Poetry Festival is the nearest I've seen to it yet. And this is the poem I wrote because I founded the Order of Wandering Poets when I was there, talking to unbelievable poets from all over the world, who most of whom were magicians and shamans as well. There was a guy from Israel who translated the Gospel of Thomas into Hebrew, for instance. Right, okay. Don't listen to the words only. Open your heart's being in the inmost valve, and let the liquids pump through from the other worlds. Spray ghosts swirl up from the river plumes across the Honduran poet. As he sings his shaman's canticles, his R's are rolling like river waves, echoing the many waters. We are a rainbow ribbon of complex, implicate light, an order infolded, unfolded, an order of wandering poets, briefly resting on a temporary bridge platform stretched across the waters of the Black River flowing from Ohrid Lake at Struga. The purposes of our order can never be written down, might perhaps be discussed only sitting together late at night in cafes anywhere from New York to Sarajevo to Avebury, Yanina, Tiberias, Bangalore, Struga. We speak languages strange to one another, but there is one heart there, big and brave, stretched out across the river. You yourself can become a member of this order of wandering poets. Fireworks appear in a boat on the river to celebrate the esteemed Chinese Poets Award of the Golden Reef. Poems about water and poems about fire balance each other out in paradoxes of love, the breaking down of fears, the ascent to the divine glory. All these things have value beyond numbering. It is time now for the order of wandering poets to vanish again into the night. We will each set out in separate directions. We will each come home differently, after unexpected adventures. Perhaps we will be recognized or not. All of us changed. It is a maze we walk, a labyrinth of lies and fear that we each must face henceforth. And before there can be much future making, whether of love or poetry, we must each unravel those tangled knots of evil and deception. First, we must comb out the long matted hair of the beloved, each as we can. And into this maze, we must each go out singing furiously. Let us do so peacefully and with strong inspiration. Though we may face silence or incomprehension or exile or punishment, even death, yet our words shall live on. Wherever the spirit of truth's freedom builds bonds of trust, like an indissoluble network of underground channels, connecting the order of wandering poets between everywhere and nowhere, with rainbow rhymes. Voila. Okay, I'm going to finish there. Thank you very much for hearing me. And I hope you enjoyed that. I'm sure you've got questions and comments.
I just wanted to say it was an amazing talk and very inspiring. But there's really a lot to talk about. So is there any particular topic that you want to cover, perhaps?
Let's just see what comes up, you know. I love it all. And I'm a fish in glory. I can swim in all these things. But, you know, let's see what people want to say. Mia's got a question. She got a hand up.
Yeah, I have. See, I need slightly more processing time to formulate some kind of coherent question out of all that. But I just want to say I'm just completely blown away. That was so interesting. And wow, you know, I'm just blown away by it and all the connections. Yeah, the connectivity of it, the art, the relationship to peace, spirituality. So yeah, I have, and then the poems I thought were great, although with poetry I find I need to take it in very slowly because I process line by line a lot slower than that and that work with the imagery. But and yeah, so it's just so relevant for me right now as well with all the things I'm thinking about. So thank you so much for that.
No, my pleasure. I can send anyone the poems if you email me in the chat or something, or I'll put my email in the chat. I'll send you the poems. No problem. Carol, you have a hand up, do you?
Yes, thank you so much. That was brilliant. And it was absolutely inspiring. And listening to you talk and your vision based on your knowledge, where do you see the US falling into this? Because we're really screwed up over here. I hate to put it that sophisticated and beautifully, but we have such a problem with education where the arts are just completely left out.
Sure.
The things that are regarded as valuable over here are computers and football and materialism.
Sure.
The only indigenous thing that we have is the Native Americans, and people have appropriated so much. We don't have the tradition that y'all have in Britain and the Celtic countries and Europe. We don't have it here. We have nothing to anchor us. So where do you see us coming into the Delphic games in this whole vision of yours?
Sure. Well, thanks for the question. We do have on this call a member of the Delphic Games Council, and I'll get to answer your question in a minute, who is American. I just want to have a go first and say that, you know, I was born in Canada. I'm North American. I've traveled around the States. I love the Americas. I think the Americas, South, North, Canada, USA, you know, has a tremendous art tradition, actually, very vibrant. If you go back to the Shakers, the Quakers, the old New England traditions, if you look at, you know, the vibrant art scene of Los Angeles and you know, I mean, look at what you've done for film and so on. I mean, I don't think you should dumb down America's potential achievement. And can I just say, by the way, that the Olympic Games after Paris are going to Los Angeles, and I would like the Los Angeles to host the next Delphic Games 2 years after the Los Angeles Games. I think you've got amazing artists, and you've created so many new art forms like the internet, for God's sake. And, you know, these visual images we're seeing of outer space, that's American technology doing that. You know, thank you. But you do have a problem. You have a tremendous kind of anti-intellectual, anti-artistic underbelly in America of semi-educated people, you know, who are anti-intellectual, and they found ringleaders in Trump, and you know the story of what went on with Steve Bannon and so on, and his World of Warcraft. So we have to fight back. The Delphic Games is the fight back. You can lead, and by getting the arts into every American school, that's where the fight back begins. And we have a number of Americans on our board. So let Roberta speak, please. She's bubbling away from New York here.
Good afternoon, Thomas. Thank you very much. My name's Roberta Williams. I am a member of the Amphictyony for the International Delphic Council. And we, in fact, have a number of people engaged here in the United States. We were a little more active 6-7 years ago, and it fell apart. And we actually have someone right now in California who's quite active with me. And we hope to reactivate this International Delphic Council in order to get the next games possibly here. And I think Thomas's idea of piggybacking with the Olympics, because it was in ancient times as well, is a perfect solution for this. And if we're able to do it in the next games in France, for sure, we'll be able to initiate something in the United States thereafter. So it is active here and we are working on it.
Great. Paula, you've had your hand up for ages. Why don't you go next?
Hiya. Thank you so much for such an incredible talk. I didn't really know anything about the Delphic Games, and I feel so enriched now to receive that information. I'm just blown away by how varied your knowledge is in different areas, and I've really enjoyed listening to you and your poetry, and thank you to everyone who organised tonight as well. So what I really liked was introducing, you know, lobbying for the arts more in education. I'm a director of a not-for-profit called Muses, and we do permaculture and land-based art and spiritual art on our place. So I just felt really happy to hear about that. I heard someone like you put it so well, and I'll definitely be researching you to help with my own work. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that sounds very relevant to the ecological arts that I talked about. Thank you, Paula. I'll put my email in the chat, and we can all stay in touch. So our Irish friend has a hand up. I'm not going to attempt pronouncing your name.
Thanks, Thomas. Ilish here. And thanks so much for your very inspiring talk. Like Paula, I had no knowledge of the Delphic Games until I got the email in relation to it coming up, and your explanation, like, it just is so rich and profound. But I found something I had come across the other day, it just echoes into it as well, given the whole sort of focus on peace as well. And I just thought it's only a short thing. This says why music, and when I saw it, I sent it to the music teacher in the school where I work. But I think it can be applied to any of the arts, and it's maybe why arts. But it says, one, music is science, music is mathematical, music is a foreign language, music is history, music is physical education, music develops insight and demands research. Music is all of these things, but most important, music is art. That is why we teach music, not because we expect you to major in music, not because we expect you to play or sing all your life, but so you will be human, so you will recognize beauty, so you will be closer to an infinite beyond this world, so you have something to cling to, so you have more love, more compassion, more gentleness, more good, in short, more life. And it just, I have no claim on it. It was something I came across, and I just find that the dovetailing was just so profound.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. That fits absolutely with what I was saying. I'm also a musician, I should confess, but I left my piano in Scotland in the castle that Leela came to. It's probably being rained on as we speak, because it was a castle which rained inside the building. But I'm living now 10 miles away from where Chopin lived with George Sand, and I'm hoping to pick up one of his old pianos. But no, send me that quote you just did.
Okay, I will.
I worked for 10 years in the UK school system. I trained as a philosophy and religious studies teacher. I was in religious studies in a whole bunch of schools and philosophy. And I wanted to teach that subject because that's about the joined upness of the curriculum.
Yeah.
What I don't like about schools is they separate everything out into sciences, arts, languages. You know, it's all separate things. I think knowledge is a seamless continuum. And it's about what Aristotle called the beginning of philosophy as wonder. You know, we should be teaching our kids how to wonder at stuff, which in Greek is thavma. Roberta's a Greek speaker. Thavma, which is the origin of the word thavmaturgos. You know, a wonder worker.
And the thing is, children know how to wonder.
I know. And we crush it out of them, which is completely, in a sense, the Delphic Games is going to pose a very interesting challenge to education to rethink what it's doing to get that Delphic award. You know, I'm planning this very carefully with the committee. We're working on it. And if anyone on here is a professional educator and wants to help get involved, just email me, get in touch. Let's plot this. This is a conspiracy and a fight back against the dumbing down of human beings by the people that have taken charge or think they've taken charge, and that want to convince us that we're just like fodder for cannon. I really pity those poor old Russian soldiers being shoved by people to go and kill people, you know. So anyway, yeah, June's got a question. Go for it.
I mean, I obviously agree with the notion of peace, but it is a growing movement already in education. I mean, there are books on compassionate music education, nurturing in music education, all of that. There's quite a considerable literature developing in this area. And also what many of us call the second aesthetic, which is music, which is not about accuracy, but about community building and well-being. And there's a huge growth in across the world in community music making. And next week, the International Society of Music Education has its conference. And there are numerous papers in this area, in that particular conference. So there are a lot of educationalists across the world who are thinking in this way, and a number of conferences in this area. I think the problem is how, I mean, the tide is growing. The ideas are out there, the ideas are being debated. But I think the difficulty, as people have basically managed to say, is the control over education that is exercised by politicians. So a lot of this work is going on outside of the educational system. with projects outside. And in a sense, this is the Dionysian bit of it, really, that education has become too Apollonian. If you use the Nietzschean senses of Apollonian and Dionysian, it's become so Apollonian. There's no room for the Dionysian within it. And the Dionysian, as it always did, flourishes outside of the systems rather than inside of the controlling systems. So I think rather than there's a sort of sense that people say this is, something we need to do. A lot of people are doing it. And as one who's been in education for 50 or 60 years and writing in that area, some of us have been writing that for a long time. I think the Delphic Games is a really interesting idea. And I think it's something that I would think would be very exciting. And I wish you all the best in trying to get authorities. The biggest problem with all of these is funding, and to get people to commit the funding. I don't think the problem is the idea. I think the problem is how to fund the idea when the prevailing systems are not in favor of it. And many of you will know that in the UK, we'll be lucky if we hold on to any of the arts beyond 16 in schools, which probably means that most of the arts faculties in universities are under threat. But I may say in the university that I was engaged in, we set up actually what was a Dionysian project, which was music outside of the curriculum, and it's really flourished there. Anybody can do it, and we have 400 students involved in it, doing a variety of things from steel pans to classical choirs. So I think the ideas are out there, and there is a lot of them there. I think how it's pulled together, how you would get something like the Delphic Games established, I think is the difficult thing. And the difficult thing always is funding. But I mean, thank you for giving us that detailed account of your work in that area. It's very exciting. Thank you.
Well, thanks, June. Yeah, I mean, just to say, we're all volunteers in the Delphic movement. We do it for love. I think the really important things in life are the things we'll do without money. I'm not paid for my work. I do it.
No, that wasn't what I was saying. I was saying that the problem with the Delphic, I mean, most of the people who are doing it for free now. But the problem for something like the Delphic Games is the funding.
Yes and no. I'm trying to answer your question in my own way, if I may. Yes and no, because there will be no cash prizes at Delphic Games. We're going to go with the original model. One thing I don't like about the Olympic movement is become a hyper commercialized capitalist enterprise thing. We're trying to keep the Delphic Games in the different ethos. People will come because they are committed to the arts and to beauty, and they will perform just to get that, that bay leaf crown or whatever. So, but obviously we need a basic infrastructure. We have a funding committee, and and I think Macron has thrown millions at the Olympic Games. There's a load of money out there. It's just a question of the dream catcher things we put up over our beds. We have to get the dream catchers put up in the right way. And once we get some of the very big artists on the planet to wake up to what's being done here, I think that will follow. So all I would say is thank you so much for the work you're doing, June, and tell your educational people about the Delphic Games, get the word out. But you're right, the theory's all there. We're trying to do it now. Yeah. Om Namo Narayana. Helen Buckingham, you have a question, do you?
Yes, hi. First of all, I'd like to thank you for a really interesting talk. That was amazing. I'm really interested because as a former primary school educator, predominantly in early years and Key Stage 1, and currently just finished my first year of Masters with Aleph Trust and a student, one of Leela's students actually.
Oh, right.
So I finished a 6-month piece of research as a researcher of my own inquiry. And I was exploring the Delphic maxim to know thyself, using the 3 great transcendentals, classical Greek, truth, beauty, goodness, godliness, arts and spirituality. So I collaborated with a visual fine arts lecturer, a friend of mine, and I was producing hundreds and hundreds of pieces of intuited art. Was greatly inspired by a lot of Leela's work. And I think my question centres around my experience of the UK education system, and quite rightly, as you said, it's kind of based on, it's military based. You spoke about the industrial complex, the destructivist attitudes, the suppression of spirituality. I'm also aware that during the last couple of years, obviously worldwide experience, the last couple of years, that the UK government, particularly their Dawn of a New Paradigm paper, which the Health and Defence Ministry, got together and wrote a paper. It's based on transhumanism. It's the forging, or rather the conjoining of humans and robotics. Now, I'm also aware, I have actually sat on another very interesting talk provided by the Galileo Commission and the Science and Medical Network, via Dr. Athena Desponia Petrari. I don't know whether you're aware of her.
Yeah, I was at the same talk, Helen.
Oh, was you? Oh, fabulous! Right.
Galileo
Okay. So the talk, that the paper was beyond a materialist worldview.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, because I have a concern that Macron is actually, one of the World Economic Forum's leaders. Obviously, these non-elected, the UN, the World Health Organization, the WEF, they're all politicized, in my view. And I've got a concern that they aren't actually interested, predominantly in what we're interested in, and the AI and robotics are blurring our view of what it is to be human. Obviously, I was very interested in what you had to say about that. I am curious about your thoughts in terms of, saving the world through the arts. And as a peace activist, as a philosopher for peace, what could we be doing? And certainly, as a student considering my dissertation, I'm really keen on, focusing in on something that can be, extraordinarily, worthy of some kind of societal change, where, arts, culture, not just in education, but, in terms of providing a focus for, a revival of those three transcendentals and, kind of altering our concept, moving away from the destruction, that, the geopolitics that you mentioned. But people seem to be very, very afraid, to speak out. There's a lot of people, as you know, if you attended that, Science and Medical Network talk, you'll be very aware of the issues.
Sure. No, thanks. That's a brilliant interconnected set of questions. I want to start my response by reminding you all of an etymological fact. As a linguist philosopher, I always go to etymology, and you may or may not know, the origin of the term art is from an old Indo-European root, ar, which means to join. And it's the same root as in radius, which joins the center and the circumference of a circle. It's the same root as in ratio, which joins two numbers up. And it's even the same root as the arm, which joins your body to other things you can pick up and manipulate. So the arts are the joining mystery. Let's redefine them as that. The mystery of joining, unification. The problem with the curriculum, and politics even, is that everything is split up. You know, the trouble with governance is that different ministries do what they want, you know. And what do you do when you get an incompetent showman at the center? You get chaos and Brexit. I mean, you know, Gladstone was a true statesman because he understood the joining bit of the duty of politicians. Macron does too, and I'm afraid I might have to break into French here and counter your attack on it. But no, he is a serious intellectual in his own way. And no, he doesn't fall for all this nonsense of transhumanism. He plays the game enough to get the backing of the big boys, but he's onto a whole different game. And so just keep the faith on that score. As so is the European Union. This is why I'm totally against Brexit, because it was a catastrophic error. And look, if you challenge what I'm saying, read Timothy Snyder's The Road to Unfreedom. You know, Brexit was brought by Putin's military intelligence assault on the common sense of the British voter. How do we claw back? Where do we go? Well, I think the Delphic Games are a fantastic tool. They've fallen into my lap like a gift from the gods. You know, I used to play rugby. I'm going to run with this ball before I get tackled, you know, and I want to get this over the line. And, you know, we can all, I mean, I'm very flexible. If it doesn't happen in Paris or LA, we'll do it somewhere else. We'll, you know, and maybe it won't be my generation. Maybe it'll be your children's children that finally do it. But I think we should do it now. As Rabbi Hillel said, if not now, when? If not us, who? You know, I think we have a duty, because if we are going to get this world back onto the kind of transpersonal wisdom path that the Galileo Commission wants, and I certainly want as a philosopher, then I think the Delphic Games could play a really good sort of PR role for the masses, you know, just as the Olympics do for the kind of sporty types. We need the Delphic Games so that, I mean, I can just see it, the televisual, you know, stuff of the great poet from Japan or the great poet from China competing, and the dance troupe from Saudi Arabia, etc. So I have faith that it's going to happen. But your research, Helen, sounds absolutely brilliant. You're lucky to have Leela as a tutor. I'm sure she's guiding you in the right way. But if you want to get in touch with me privately, Leela can put you in touch. I'm happy to have a longer conversation.
Thank you.
Deep stuff there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Ken, do you want to give us a word of wisdom from Japan? I've just been watching a newscast about a famous dog in Japan in the subway. They've just made a movie about that. I love the Japanese people. They're so artistic and aesthetic. What do you do? Can I ask you a question?
Here's my question about the history of each country. Every country has a unique history to explain where we came from and where we are going to. But as you know, the history itself is likely to be antagonistic with neighbors countries. So because we are here and you're there, so if we construct the global or the humanistic human's history, how can we construct a human history as a whole Earth? So here's my question.
Well, yes, I know what you're saying, and obviously history can be weaponized and misused. You know, and I set up philosophers and historians for peace in the 80s to address this. That's why I did my doctoral thesis on a new genre of history. I argue that transpersonal history is what goes into the depths behind the political events, the shallow history that is taught as history, like the 100 Years' War, the War of the Roses, the kind of Normans and castles and Hitler. I mean, the sort of stuff they give kids is like pap, right? What we should be teaching is the spiritual transpersonal side of history. You know, I think every kid has the right to know about the life of Buddha, the life of Plato, the life of Christ, the life of Muhammad, the transpersonal bits of history, because that makes sense. They can relate to an existential yearning. And they should know about the Delphic Games. Every kid on the planet should know about this. This is so exciting that, you know, these ancients realized how important the arts were. I wonder if in Japan they have something similar, because I'm a great fan of the Shinto culture. I know quite a lot about Japanese Buddhism. Surely they must have had like Delphic Games type things going on.
Yeah, I think that's, in fact, I wanna create a different history of humans, because 1,000 years ago, Buddhism come to Japan, and so, and as a religion come to Japan. So in the human history, I think the human history, like the mix of the human connection. And so if I look at the human connection history, look at the history from the human connection, so we can go beyond the boundary of country or the area, like a Southeast Asian country, or the China and the Japan, the South Korea, North Korean. So, but as you know, a lot of people come and go between the China and Korean Peninsula and Japan.
Yeah.
And
but
so
that's all what I call egoic history, isn't it, Ken? If you look at it from this perspective, or an enlightened transpersonal perspective,
right,
I mean,
right.
national histories are histories of ego, collective ego. You know, what I'm trying to do with transpersonal history is get to the history of enlightenment. What's exciting about this planet is how, in spite of all the ego, in spite of the Boris Johnsons, we are getting towards enlightenment as a planet. And I believe the Delphic Games can be a help, like a signal, a kind of sending up a flare in the night. Look, guys, enlightenment over here. You know, I mean, let's do this so that we send out a signal of hope to the coming generations. Because if we do nothing and let the kind of ignoranti continue their rampage, well, we might as well go to another planet. And I'm not prepared to do that. I love this one. I'm an earthling, you know, and I'm sticking around with Gaia. So the other lot can leave this planet, you know. Annalise, did you have a question?
Okay.
Thanks, Ken. You need to unmute, madam.
I know, I couldn't work out how to unmute myself after all these months on Zoom. Well, first of all, we basically have reached our 90 minutes. So I'm happy to continue, but that's, you know, this is basically the end of the Zoom call. So I just wanted to, as a perhaps last question, ask you, what would you ask of us to help your project? And one thing that has come to mind to me, within INSS, so within this organization, there is a conference that is going to be done next year. And they are calling for speakers and presenters. And the reason I'm mentioning the conference is that the last one, there were 120 or 150 participants, and a very large part of them work in education. So if your public is people working in education, the conference is probably the best audience, because it brings everyone who's interested in spirituality in one place. So we're doing arts, but of course there are, you know, professors in this group, and so arts and educations go hand in hand. But you know, if your target audience is the education system, the conference is probably a great way of doing this work.
Sure. Well, thank you. Your question was what can you do?
Yes, how can we help?
Yeah, I mean, obviously things like that conference, if you can smuggle me in as a speaker, I'm happy to come. Tell me what protocols I have to do. And just generally, you know, go forth and flourish, all of you that have been here, because all of us know that this is the right path to go. The problem we're up against, of course, is the media, which is you know, doesn't carry good news, does it? This is good news I've shared today. And of course, it won't be on the front page of the Times or the Telegraph or even the Guardian. We might get a timely footnote. So just share the good news, you know, and get in touch, help in your own country, your own culture, your own circle, and just be pleased that this is happening, you know. I mean, I'm a believer. I don't know, you believe in spirituality. I'm a great believer in prayer. I've read a lot of the works of a French scholar, Hadot, who wrote a wonderful book about meditation in the classical philosophy tradition. They had their own forms of prayer. If you read Iamblichus and Plato, and you know, and we've got these ancient texts of Orphic hymns that have come down. You know, the Delphic oracle was a prayer-based place. It was a very deep spiritual place. And it wasn't built in a day. So if we're going to try and revive all that, don't forget, I also want the oracle back. This can only come from deep, deep inner work and prayer. So the last thing I'd say to help is just do your own inner work. Sharpen your own soul commitment to this your own enlightenment process. However you define that, you know. I'm a great believer in Plato, and I'm a great lover of the Republic. And you probably know that Plato explains enlightenment. Oh, by the way, I'm teaching a course on enlightenments, plural, at the moment. It's a year-long, like a master's course on enlightenments. If you're interested, just email me. Yeah. And it's really amazing course. I'm doing it with a Canadian friend who's a master of Eastern thought, and we're doing a sort of joint thing. And Plato's view of enlightenment is really interesting because he says in the Republic that we're all trapped in a cave. We're all prisoners of illusion. We're all watching these flickering images on the screen. We have to get free, and then we can escape the cave and get out into the light. We get out into the blinding light. That's the enlightenment moment. But we don't stop there. We go back into the cave, and we help our other friends and relatives and colleagues to also realize there's a whole beautiful world out there outside the cave. And that to me is the job of the educator. That's why Plato founded the academy. You know, that's why philosophers exist. That's why we have universities.
It's also the job of artists to take people, you know, out of the caves and back into the cave. It's very much the job of artists. Yeah.
Right. So anyway, there we are. Let's all get out of the cave and help others to do the same. I'll see you all in Delphi at the next game, or in Paris.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Yeah.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I'll see you again. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.